Hi there.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for speaking. I'm going to hand it over to you. I think we're all very excited to hear what you have to say.
Great. Good to
Putting
hear.
the slides right up, and I hope you can see them now.
All right. So let's get started then. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to this session on collaboration between UX experts and software developers. As Annie said, we are Bert and Vicky. We are UX researchers and service designers at Clockwork Belgium. For those of you who don't know it, Clockwork Belgium is the UX and service design unit of Ordina Belgium, and Ordina in turn is one of the largest IT service providers in the Benelux. We've got headquarters in the Netherlands and then offices throughout Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Our UX and service design unit, Clockwork, consists of a team of about 20 UX researchers, UX UI designers, and service designers. And in those roles, being part of Ordina, we collaborate with developers almost on a daily basis. Those can be our own Ordina colleagues. We've got a couple of hundreds of developers working at Ordina, but they can also be non-Ordina developers, other developers that we encounter during our clients' projects and in our consultancy assignments. And so we collaborate really with developers on a daily basis. And usually in this day and age, and I think this will be the case for many of us, we do so as part of multidisciplinary Agile Scrum teams.
Yeah, and as you could already see before, the problem that we tried to tackle in this research project was that developers and UX professionals often seem to actually be speaking different languages, and you can take it both literally and figuratively. So more literally, even for us, sometimes it's hard to align on what is actually a wireframe, a mock-up, or a design. So developers might actually have still an entirely different idea about that. And more figuratively, I think you all recognize the feeling as a researcher where you think, wow, so I did all those interviews, all those journey mappings, and finally in the end product, I don't really get the same feel as what I've put together in my nice vision statement and so on. And UX designers probably have similar feelings sometimes that I made this really cool concept, and finally it's not really so much what has been built in the long run. And then developers from their side, they probably also have often the feeling that, hey, designer, you threw this fancy design at me, and now I'm supposed to build it. So, well, thank you. So you sometimes get this little bit of a blame game where, we're pointing at each other when the end result is maybe not as perfect as we had all hoped. So we really believe that there's a strong need to bridge the gap, to improve communications between those different collaborators in the end.
Yeah. So in an attempt to prevent these situations that Bert describes, we decided to take on the challenge of finding out how we can improve communication between UX experts and software developers, especially in these less mature multidisciplinary teams that are still looking for a way to really organize that. When we got started on this project at the very, very beginning, we performed a Google search and also a Reddit search on what it's like for other professionals, and then especially software developers, to collaborate with us, to work with UX professionals. And when we talk about UX professionals tonight, we're talking about UX researchers on the one hand, and UX UI designers on the other hand. So we really wanted to know, how do they feel about working with us? Because obviously we know our side of the story. But we were surprised to find very little on the topic when we did this Google search and this Reddit search. What we did find a lot about was UX professionals complaining about things that they commonly face. The things that we talk about, on a Friday night when we have a beer after work and we're talking about the developers and all the issues we face. But we know our side of the story, and that's not what we wanted. What we really wanted to do in this project was to apply a user-centered design thinking mindset. Within Clockwork, we apply this as much as possible within all our projects. We empathize with those that we design solutions for so that we can really understand things from their point of view. And with this study, what we wanted to find out was, how do our users, the developers who really build upon our research and design work to do their thing, how do our users perceive working with us? You know, if they're having a beer at the bar on Friday night after work, what do they talk about when they're talking about the UX guys? How do they feel about working with us? You know, what are the issues that they face? And what does that mean in terms of solutions for really improving communication with team members in these agile multidisciplinary teams? So in a way, we decided to eat our own dog food, and we applied our own methods, the design thinking methods, our own methods to our own work. Maybe a quick note before we dive in. We collected our findings into a white paper, and we will share the link to the download of the white paper at the end of the talk. Maybe we can also put it in the chat later. Today, we're really going to talk about the gist of the research, the highlights of our study, but please feel welcome to download the white paper to find some additional information about our study. Another side note before we really go into our study is it's important to know that we, as I said at the beginning, we work daily, we work in these Agile Scrum teams. That's the context, that's the reality of a lot of UX'ers and software developers these days. So to provide some context to our findings and also to the solutions that we will propose later, it's important to know a thing or two about Scrum. So for those of you who are not that familiar with Scrum, I'm going to give you a very brief introduction. And to those of you who are familiar with Scrum, I promise it will be a very short, very brief introduction. So Scrum is a framework that was developed for managing work on complex development projects, based on the premise of self-organizing cross-functional teams who gradually deliver working software throughout subsequent development sprints. And sprints can be anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. It's really up to the team to decide. And Scrum teams will start from a product backlog, a backlog that describes the required functionalities for a piece of software. And then each sprint, they will draw from that backlog the features that they will be tackling that sprint, the things that they will be developing in the upcoming sprints, and then work towards delivering what is called an increment to the software towards the end of each sprint. So there's a clear difference there with waterfall project in that there's a much bigger focus on creating transparency within the team, on taking ownership, collaborating, team collaboration, and adapting to change. And figures on the number of organizations that have started to implement agile development practices hover somewhere between 87 to 95% of all organizations, according to research. And Scrum is the most widely implemented agile development methods nowadays. So we really took that as, we took Scrum teams as the background for our study and the solutions we created, because it's a methodology, the agile methodology, if I can say it like that, that we have the most experience with ourselves, and that's also the most applied within the broader software development community. Okay, so let's get into our study. First of all, how did we go about doing this study? Well, we created a research approach that consisted of 3 phases. We started with a qualitative phase, then moved on to a quantitative phase, and we concluded with a co-creation phase. In that first phase, that qualitative phase, we started out with a number of explorative interviews with software developers. Because we really, blank page, blank canvas, we told ourselves no assumptions here. So we had no idea what could be the issues from their side, and we really wanted to get their point of view. So we started with a couple of conversations, very open conversations with Ordina developers, some senior developers, talking about how do you experience working with UX researchers and UX UI designers. What are the issues that you face? What do you think is the added value of these profiles in agile development teams? And once we got their input, we headed to a developer conference. You can see on the second picture, to get a broader audience, to get input from a broader developer audience. And Bert, if you could go back 1 slide. You can see also on the picture that we used a UX punching ball as a playful conversation starter to really get the conversation going with the developers. And then Yeah, I think there's a bit of a lag on the slides, but that's okay. So in the second phase, once we got a view on okay, these are the themes that live within the developer community when they're reflecting about what it's like to work with UX professionals. Once we got that, we felt that we were ready to create a survey because we had an understanding of the types of issues that live within that community, but we also wanted to get a view on what are the most urgent issues, what are the most pressing issues, so what is the relative importance of each of these. So we conducted a survey. We conducted it at a conference in Belgium, end of last year that was, and then we also sent it out to an international audience of software developers, both Ordina developers and non-Ordina developers, and using Survey Gizmo, Amazon mTurk, and we reached a total sample of 270 respondents. Important, these are 270 software developers who were screened on whether or not they had experience working with UX experts. Obviously, we weren't going to get a lot of information from people who had no experience at all working with UX experts. So we screened them on that question, first of all, and then we ended up with a sample of which 95% said they had experience working with a UX or UI designer, and 43% said they had some experience working with a UX researcher. We also briefly explained what we meant by each. In terms of the profile of the people who participated in our survey, as you can see here, we had a mix in terms of type of developer, if I can call it like that. So a mix of people who identified as a front-end developer, a back-end developer, a full-stack developer, or a software architect. The majority of our sample had between 0 and 10 years of experience as a software developer. And in terms of country of employment, as you can see there, 78% of our respondents was employed in Europe. That was mainly Belgium and the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. And then 11% was employed in North America, and the remainder of the sample was then spread out across the other continents. And then as a third phase for us was the co-creation phase. The whole gist of design thinking is to co-create solutions once we get insight into the issues at hand. So Bert and I, we performed our analysis on the qualitative and the quantitative data, and then combining the insights from those two, we had a good overview of what the most urgent or pressing issues were, and we invited a number of UX specialists, so researchers, designers, but also, of course, software developers and a Scrum Master, since we were talking about this agile context, in a co-creation session where we collaboratively designed solutions for the issues that we had identified in the survey.
So I'm sure you're all dying to know by now what the answer to the research question is. So how do they actually experience working with UX professionals? Maybe you're a little bit afraid as well what the answer will be, but then I can calm you down right away, because we'll start with the good news. About 92% of all developers actually said that the involvement of UX experts helps to increase the value of the end product. So that's a good news to start with. So they say, yeah, they actually contribute to the specification of functional requirements. And 87% say that the fact that there are wireframes helps actually to developers to focus on their tasks. So they just also really want to be busy with the technical part, with the building, with how to realize the ideas. So it really helps for them if there is a sort of, something to hold on to, something that defines the actual work that needs to be done, what everybody agrees on. And so you notice that like 90% actually said that it makes it easier to align with clients, and they really just want to, do the building. It's also what is expected from them most of the time. So UX experts come in handy to perform really that sort of negotiation or the alignment between business and user in the end, but also the technical people.
Yep. So that's the good news, but of course we were also looking for things to improve, and some things did come out. Of course, a number of issues were raised by developers when we discussed with them how they perceive collaborations with UX experts. Basically, there are 3 key points of attention that came out as the most urgent issues, the most important things to think about. And the first one is that developers indicate that UX experts are not always sufficiently aware of what is technically feasible. May not be very surprising, or it may be surprising. Developers, they generally feel that UX professionals underestimate the impact of what may seem to be a quite simple requirement or a really small detail from our point of view, from a UX point of view. But they feel, as the quote also illustrates, that we generally lack some technical knowledge to really be able to assess what is the impact of some of our requirements, of our questions or design work. Second, developers also feel, and this was a higher percentage also that agreed with the statement, they feel that they're not involved early enough in the creation of designs. That there is not enough discussion or time for discussion about early design work. We're talking about wireframe prototyping work at an early stage of the whole software development process. And the fact that they are not involved sufficiently enough in their view then results in the first situation of designs, for example, not being technically feasible. So that was a second main point of concern for developers. And their third point of concern, the third thing that annoys them the most in collaborating with UX profiles, is that they said requirements or designs are not always ready for development when development starts. And if that's the case, then that means that code change requests will come in while they are already starting the work on a user story, and that they are delayed because they need to go back and forth to check requirements, to check designs with the UX experts during the development. So these are basically the key points of attention that really came out of our research. There were a number of smaller issues. When I say small, it means that they were topics that were raised during the qualitative exploration, but they were not as, well, the relative importance of these issues was smaller coming out of the survey, but you'll find more about it in the white paper. For example, what's about the use of predefined component libraries and things like that. But then we mainly focus on these 3 key points of attention. And then if you look at the root causes, the things that lie beneath these frustrations, then it seems that the way that those who participated to our study see it, problems arise due to 3 root causes. The first one is the first root cause of problems or miscommunication is often the lack of simultaneous involvement of UX experts and developers in all phases of the software development process. The fact that not everybody is always involved at the same time from start to finish in a project means that, sometimes it leads to misunderstanding of requirements when the UX experts have disappeared from the team by the time that the developers start their work, or to the technical perspective, not being represented at all in the early design phases when developers are not involved yet in a sprint 0 or whatever goes before the first sprint. So here we decided when we did the co-creation that we really wanted to focus on finding solutions for increasing the involvement of all the necessary profiles in all phases of the software development process. So that was one thing that we really wanted to focus on. The second root cause lies in a limited knowledge of each other's field of expertise. Developers indicated that UX experts, as I said, lack a solid technical background, which then leads to the frustration of, damn, this design, it's not feasible, I cannot do this, or this should have been approached in another way. Maybe there was a better solution from a technical point of view, or a more innovative solution from a technical point of view. That's one thing, but the story is nuanced in the sense that developers also indicated that in order to really have a good collaboration, they themselves should also have more insight into the nuts and bolts of UX UI research and design. So it's a two-way story. It goes both ways. And so that was a second topic for us during our co-creation session, was really to check what can we do to make sure that we get more knowledge and a better field of each other's field of expertise. And then the third root cause that we identified is the difference in views on the importance and value of UX research and design. The people who participated in our study, they suggested that within the development community, but also, and that's also important, among project sponsors and among sales teams, that there's big differences in terms of how important UX research and UX UI design are considered to be, and how much money project sponsors are willing to spend. So both among developers and among other stakeholders in projects, we felt that we had to think about solutions on how we can show to each and every stakeholder, but especially also developers, what the value is of including UX experts in software development projects. On the other hand, as Bert already said, they do see a lot of value, so that was a good thing. But still, how can we make sure that we're all aligned on the value of bringing UX into the project teams?
Yeah, so then of course we have a little bit of a better understanding of what is it actually that developers perceive and how it is from their side to work with us. We have those root causes identified, and with that we went into the co-creation session. So there the goal was, how can we actually provide some solutions here? Because of course in the end we want to remedy these root causes or these issues that show up. And one thing that was really crucial for us was to come up with feasible solutions. Now, this is not a new problem, of course. This is not a new debate. You can online find quite some resources on how to improve collaboration between UXers and developers, but often they are quite high level. For example, you can read an article about Agile UX and they will tell you, oh yeah, you should organize the design sprint, let's say, or the sprint in which design work is being done, and you should do that 2 weeks before the development sprint, and then you get a few short tips and tricks. But then the day after, you come into the office at your client and you're wondering really, okay, now how should I do this, right? And another example is Lean UX, where you can read an entire book about what actually developers should do the research. Then they have all the context and they're aware of the reasons, they're aware of the strategy and the vision. And that's, of course, really cool if you can do that. But then the day after you come into the office and you propose, so should developers do the research? And I think many of you probably have some imagination on what the potential answer will be. And some of the answers will be probably like, what, research? They should do bug fixing or something. So we really wanted to have some suggestions on, yeah, what could you try out potentially tomorrow, when you come into the office and you face these kind of issues. One really fundamental idea, though, and that's the one that's really underlying all the different suggestions that we make here today, is that we propose to make better use or more use of the existing Scrum ceremony. So these rituals were actually created in the first place to improve collaboration within a multidisciplinary team, let's say. So often you get, if you introduce more meetings, etc., more rituals, you will get some breaking, you will get people answering like, yeah, but I don't really have time for more meetings. You kind of lose that buy-in in a way. So we really wanted to make more use of the existing stuff that's already there, and you can somehow boost to improve that collaboration. And one suggestion we came up with, but we'd be really curious to hear from you what kind of initiatives you could imagine or that you've already tried. But one suggestion we came up in the co-creation workshop with everyone was a systematic design review. It's something that's really easy to do. It can be done during the daily stand-ups in the morning. The designer just shows, well, that's what I've been working on very quickly. That's a concept I'm thinking of. That's a new feature I thought of here. I developed designed some screens. Can you just quickly assess what the feasibility of this? And this way, in that 2 weeks before the development sprint, a designer can really evolve from low fidelity wireframes all the way up to the high fidelity finished designs in a way, with this constant feedback on feasibility. You could also try to create a definition of done for designs. It's something that's quite common for development work. When is a user story finished? When is development work finished? It's not so common for design work. So you could also create a sort of a checklist of agreements on how should you describe a design? What states in terms of designs of screens or features does a developer require, and so on, before we think a design is finished? We've tried it a couple of times, and we actually built it up dynamically throughout the project. We didn't start with one, so we just got feedback on our designs. Oh, by the way, could you describe a little bit more how this would work if that happens? Could you describe what happens if there is no search result, for example? So we got this dynamic feedback, and then we realized, well, why don't we just make a checklist out of it? And then it's very clear when a design is finished in a way. And then during a backlog prioritization meeting, you can just quickly go through the list and say, well, yeah, okay, that design is finished. This we can take up in the next sprint. Then there's design while refine. It's also an initiative that we thought of that could happen during the backlog prioritization meeting, because it's a meeting where typically many stakeholders are represented, right? There's business, there's user researchers, for example, UX experts, there's a designer, and also the technical people are involved. And what could happen there is that designers can design on the spot. Now, of course, some UX designers might already worry right now. We, of course, don't mean that from scratch designers should just go through it and finish their work pixel perfect right in a meeting. It's not what we mean. We're talking more about doing some quick arrangements, rearranging some content, thinking like, oh, what if we introduce this step and we move that to the other side, or we create another stage in the journey. And it really helps the discussion. It's why we make wireframes in the first place, in a way, because making it visual really sort of helps the decision making. You kind of get an intuitive feel of, is this a good solution? Should we do it like that, or it doesn't really feel right? So actually within the meeting, just playing around with some minor changes can really help the decision making within the meeting even. And so you don't have to afterwards go and redesign, email that back to the client, and so on and so forth, because then you're gone for 1 or 2 days really. Another possibility is to do user story kickoffs. Now, it's a very simple idea. It really doesn't take a lot of time, but when a developer picks up a piece of development work, a user story, for example, quickly the designer, the researcher, and the developer gather, and they just go through the requirements together once again. And I think you'd be surprised what kind of misunderstandings could be prevented really from just going through that text, which, let's be honest, cannot really contain all the information. And it's also an opportunity to give some context to the developers, why this is done, and so on. How does it fit in the broader product, for example? Try it out. And then, another possibility is for UX experts to participate in software testing. So often I think in our case anyway, we often have the experience that there are dedicated testers, user acceptance testers, and so on. But we think user researchers, UX researchers, UX designers also have their role in this type of software testing. A researcher could check whether these new features that were implemented, are they still in line with the original vision that was set out? Designers can check whether their original designs are still implemented. So of course there should have been some feasibility checks during the design process, as we've discussed, but there's a lot of complexity going on in technical work. So is that result that was built still compatible with the design work that was done before? And it could be part of the definition of done of user stories in the development sense. So a user story, a piece of development work, can only be considered done if it has been reviewed by UX experts. And the idea is that there we can also prevent some things coming out that haven't really been checked from UX research or design point of view.
Yes. So the solutions that were co-created that Bert just talked about were mainly oriented towards that first root cause that we talked about, the lack of simultaneous involvement of all the necessary profiles in each phase of the development lifecycle. But we've also talked about two other root causes, which were the limited knowledge of each other's field of expertise, and also the different views on the value and importance of UX research and design. And more oriented towards those things, another couple of solutions that were co-created were the following. First, there is the UX experts participate in story estimation. What is that? During story estimation, many teams will do that during the sprint planning or backlog refinement or prioritization meeting. UX experts could actually participate in story estimation. And the idea would be that they would do that in a binding manner. Their votes would count. It may strike people as a bit odd that we suggest this, given the fact that we just said, well, UX experts don't have the technical knowledge to really assess the effort that is required to implement a certain feature or a certain solution. But on the other hand, I mean, the ritual of story estimation within Scrum, the value of this ritual is not only or not just in the final estimates and the value in the user story points that we put in Jira. The value of user story estimation is first and foremost in the discussion that is set up between the team members who are doing the estimates. Because if there's a big range, big difference, you know that there's a misunderstanding on the requirements and that something needs to be discussed there. So the idea is that if you have the UX experts actually participate in that process of story estimation, that it will be a great learning opportunity for them. They'll gradually get a much better feel of what it means to implement a certain solution or a certain design proposal. And we would suggest that they do it in a binding manner. Why? Because I don't know about you, but if I'm not involved in a binding manner in some voting or discussion, then I will be less engaged myself. And also chances are that other team members will not be taking into account my opinion that much. So this is an idea that we came up with that would increase the feeling of UX experts for development work. The next solution was working the other way around, is really about creating a learning moment for developers to learn more about UX and the value of UX, and also for other stakeholders, by the way. And it's about having developers observe user testing. And it may not be a groundbreaking idea for us, but on the other hand, when we talk about this idea to developers, it's more groundbreaking for them than for UX experts. They don't always get the chance to do that either. If they are interested, then sometimes budget stakeholders or project sponsors, budget owners, will sometimes just not allow the developers the time during a development sprint to check in on user testing of prototypes or upcoming designs. It's a great idea if you can get the time for them to have them observe a user testing session. I'm sure many of you have done it before. We have, and we can see that it's so much more powerful than just telling them what came out of a user testing session. But if it appears that they're not allowed the time to spend on this, what you could also do, what somebody in our team does, is to invite some users to the sprint review, where you actually have a on-the-spot user test or of the increment that was delivered. Or it could be, a video that you took of a user testing session and that you play during a sprint review. You don't only have the developers there, you also have other stakeholders there that are also that may need to be convinced a bit on the value of UX research and things like that. So we feel that this could be an opportunity to create a learning moment for developers. And then finally, we're coming to the end of our talk here. You could all ask your organizations to really start organizing a basics of UX training for developers and a basics of development training for UX experts. It's a starting point. Of course, the learning moments that you get throughout working in a team are much more valuable, but it could be a starting point to get a much better feel of each other's work. So this is a bit of a recap of everything that we said today, well, of the solutions that we propose and how they could be integrated in existing Scrum ceremonies, because as Bert said, we really wanted to go for pragmatic solutions that you can integrate, that you can start tomorrow, that don't require big landslide changes in an organization, because that's something that Scrum, Agile in general, often struggles with, the organizational and cultural change that's required. So we really wanted to go for pragmatic things. We've already tried out a couple of things, and yeah, we're super curious to hear about your experiences in the Q&A. Anything that you have tried, anything else that you have began installing in your teams, we'd love to hear about it. So for now, thank you for joining. Thank you, UX'ers, for having us.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Voila, let's see you in the Q&A.
Hey guys, thanks so much. That was really fascinating. And I really appreciate the extremely pragmatic advice at the end. Really practical things that we all can do. A few things I've done before that I found really valuable, including being involved in the poker.
Cool.
I found that really, really useful. It was educational for me, and I think that you're absolutely right. It starts the conversations that help to kind of cross-seed and educate. So Thank you so much. We did get a couple of really good questions from the audience. One from Jasper that I'll just read. Actually, he said, you see code skills appear more and more on designer job descriptions. And do you feel that this is to provide better communication between Scrum team members and more realistic requirements? Or is this just the field gravitating towards designers that are able to build their own designs?
Did you say code scales?
Skills.
Skills.
Yeah, sorry.
Skills. Yeah. So are they looking for like kind of these double skill sets, designers and developers? Or do you think that people are asking for this because they recognize that it's important for UX designers to just know and be able to communicate with developers? Good question.
Yeah, a very good question. Not an easy answer, I feel.
In our team, there are quite some designers that actually have some skills in coding, not necessarily really building from scratch all the way through. But we've got really positive feedback on that, both from the clients and the designers themselves, actually, because they can really just quickly spar with the actual builders, right, the actual developers, and it seems to help and really facilitate the collaboration because you're on the same page much more quickly.
Sure, can't hurt. So in addition to that previous question, there was a follow-up that someone else posted that said, what do you think are the most useful technical frameworks for a UX designer to know about?
Most useful technical frameworks?
Yeah.
Do they mean programming languages?
I guess so. Technical language that you should know about. Obviously, we should know what HTML does versus CSS versus JavaScript, but are there other?
That's more for the front end, indeed.
Yeah.
But in terms of backend development, I feel that most of our respondents were people who were very much into the Java technology. But I have to say that, and .NET, but I have to say that apart from that, I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, we're not the best people to ask, I think, because we're quite on the kind of the service design part and the user research part of the process.
But we did. Yeah, we did ask the question in terms of respondent profile. We did ask every participant the question: which frameworks do you work with the most, and which programming language do you use the most? And then we ran some statistics on that to check if there was any significant difference between people more specialized into one programming language versus the other. We didn't find any differences into how they felt about how they scored on the different statements. So that's something that I can say.
So maybe it's not something that you necessarily need to prepare for ahead of time, but just be aware that when you start a new job or start working with a new team, it's really important to work together to understand the each other's perspectives and understand each other's tools.
Yeah, and do some kind of the tools also, and do some kind of I don't know, basic lingo thing. Because I mean, in one of my teams, we worked out some wireframes and we prototyped based on wireframes. And then a couple of months later, I heard one of the designers say that they thought it was such a bad design at the very start. And we were like, those were not designs; those were our wireframes. They were not visual designs. So it starts from sharing literally a common language. Do
quite literally some knowledge sharing sessions. Actually, when we do it internally, people with this the coding skills, designers that have some, sometimes they give these sort of mini seminars, half an hour or small hour, on what is React, what is Bootstrap, all these frameworks and libraries and so on. And it's super interesting, and it really helps you in the next project to get some deeper insight in what are they actually busy with and what's our leg room as well, because we can of course come up with like crazy innovative solutions, but if we know at least a little bit of the context and what can be remotely possible within a technical setup, it really helps. And you also gain a little bit of respect from developers in the sense that you're taking them into account, right? You're not just wildly making some proposals.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. I mean, you learn a lot just from working together on a project, but sometimes we do have to take these moments where we just share with each other, similar to what we're doing tonight, and just say, hey, like, let me tell you about my job and what I've learned and how the best way to work with me.
Which is not always easy in the daily rush, but yeah.
No. Okay, well, thank you both so much. It was really thorough, fascinating, interesting research, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us. I loved how both talks were very based on cases this evening. I find that really fascinating to just like get a glimpse into the work that people are actually doing on a daily basis and what's inspiring them. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Thanks to you, and thanks for everyone for tuning in.
Yes. Yeah. We will also have a Q&A room set up for you afterwards in a session. So if anyone has specific questions for Vicky or Bertz about their research or anything else, jump in. And
suggestions, other ideas, also welcome.
Yes, or other ideas, absolutely. Otherwise, I will see you on the flip side, and hopefully also next month, last Tuesday of October. Take care, everyone. Have a good night. We'll see you next time.